Good morning, evening, and afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. I'm Amanda Bullen, and I'm the manager at Kingdom at Work. And our goal at Kingdom at Work is to inspire, ignite, and equip leaders to find their why. Before we dive into today's content, I want to go over a few housekeeping rules with you to ensure a smooth and productive session. First and foremost, we want this webinar to be as interactive as possible. So feel free to use the Q&A feature to ask a question or share any thoughts throughout the presentation. We do value your participation. Now about questions. We will have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar where we'll address many of the questions you've submitted. So if you have burning questions, don't worry, we will get to them. If for some reason we can't address all questions during the Q&A, or if your question requires a more in-depth response, fear not. We are committed at Kingdom at Work in providing valuable content, and some of the unanswered questions might be featured in our upcoming blog post. So keep an eye out for our blog for more insights and answers. Lastly, this webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available for you to review or share with colleagues. We'll send out an email with the recording link shortly after the event. On to our speaker. Today, we are thrilled to have Brad Nelson. Brad began his career with Beat and Bow Homes in 2007 as a software developer. Since then, he has worn many hats throughout the company, serving in several vital roles. In 2023, Brad joined the Beat and Bow Company's board of directors. Brad is a constant improver, always tinkering with things to make them better. In 2021, he pioneered the development of Elevate Building Supply to streamline the construction process for Beat and Bow Homes and save money for both the company and its customers. Brad is a passionate leader and resourceful problem solver, and he is intentional about finding opportunities to serve those around him. Brad lives in Lubbock, Texas with his wife, Jessica, and enjoys camping, cheering on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, and spending time with their two dogs. We are thrilled to have you, Brad.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm really thrilled to be here talking about this topic today. It's a special one for me, and that is feedback and how we should be hungering for the truth always. And so, a couple things just up front. We're going to be talking about receiving feedback. And this is something I think I could probably talk about for hours and hours and probably days and days, if I'm being really honest. And we've got a really limited amount of time today. So I'm not going to be able to cover everything. I'm going to hit some of the highlights, some of the lowlights. I'm going to skip some highlights, skip some lowlights. So there's probably a favorite feedback topic that you have that I'm not going to hit, and that's okay. We'll still be friends at the end of this. And another thing too, I really love Q&A. So if you have some great questions, I would really love to answer those. So I dare you to ask me a really hard question, and we'll see if you get a good answer. Couple things that I'm not really going to deal with directly as well is like how to give feedback. I feel like that's actually almost like a separate webinar or separate even week-long conference, honestly, giving feedback to people. I could talk for days on that one too. It is a great topic. We just don't have time to hit it all. And then the other thing we're not going to really hit on too much is we're going to kind of be focused on like hearing the hard things. There's a lot of feedback we get as leaders that's like good feedback, and that's great, but it's not necessarily like what we're going to talk today, because I don't think any of us really need improvements in that. One example of that, this morning, my wife texts me, and I was over at her office yesterday, and she has a colleague who shares my affinity for facial hair. And he has this really awesome mustache. And I was just telling him, man, I love your mustache. I think it's great. He rides a Harley, has a cool mustache. And just this morning, my wife texts me and she's like, yeah, he got some feedback about his mustache yesterday from one of his patients. And his patient, maybe said some things I won't repeat on this webinar, but it was very positive feedback. I think it's funny, but, we're not going to hit on positive feedback. We're going to talk about the hard to hear stuff today. So, and if we're jumping into hard to hear, I got to start with like the first memory I have of the really hard to hear feedback. And before I worked for Beaton Bow, I worked for the medical school here in Lubbock. And I was working in a research department. I was kind of splitting my time between departmental IT guy and helping with some software stuff with that some of the researchers were working on. And back then they had a department that was charging for things, and they used QuickBooks to track all of their accounting. And I didn't really understand much about accounting back then, didn't understand much about QuickBooks. But one day they came to me and they were like, hey, we lost all our QuickBooks data, and you're the IT guy, you should help us get it back. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's something I can do. And I went down there and I found that they were keeping their backups on floppy disks, which was a thing back then. And they their floppy disks, their backups were bad. And one of the prime rules in IT is you always test your backups. You got to be testing them. Otherwise, you should just assume they're bad and they're not going to do you any good. And so I get down there, discover the backups are bad, and I have to deliver the news to the guy, and I have to say, hey, man, sorry, your backups are bad. Good luck. Nothing I can do for you. And he was understandably not super happy about that. And so later on, I get a call from the department head, and he calls me into his office, and he says, hey, it's your job to make sure we have good backups. And why didn't we have good backups? And, that needs to be different in the future. And that's a totally reasonable thing to say to the IT guy. Like, it's your job as the IT guy to have good backups. But I was kind of a dumb kid back then. And that's not what I heard him say. What I heard him say was that you are the problem. And you are either you're going to be different or the backup situation is going to be different. But we're going to make this difference somehow. And that really, I was just really concerned about that, because if I'm the problem, then me being around is the problem, and the fix for this is to get rid of me, right? And that, of course, got me, I got really defensive, and it kind of became about my identity, right? And so my identity was now in challenge, and it was a very hard thing for me. And I wish I had this story where I was like, oh, and this is how it ended, and Brad learned a lesson and made backups our priority from that point forward. And that's not how that went, actually. I didn't really learn a lesson, and didn't really learn about feedback until I came to this company. And so but the cool thing was that here I have gone through a very long journey of how to receive feedback well and how to listen and make it not about my identity. And so that's really what I want to talk to you about today is that. And really the next story that happened that's really memorable for me when it comes to feedback is I came to this, Amanda said I came here as a software developer. And, software developers write code. And one of the ways we know our code is good is we put it through what's called a code review. And in the process of a code review, basically another software developer takes your code and just rips it to shreds, essentially is how that works. They point out everything that could possibly be wrong with that code. They're going to tell you about it. And it's like very high feedback, very fast, all in the same moment. And let's see how fast we can rip you down. And and anything that's left standing is a good thing, right? So that's going to be good code. And this was my very first time doing it. I had not really been a professional software developer before, so you could imagine my first code review was not good because I wasn't really writing good code. I was actually writing terrible code. And Cal Zant, my leader back then, you probably know him from previous webinars. He taught me something. He taught me a different way to think about this feedback in code reviews. What he showed me was that he gave me a mantra that software developers use, and it's, I am not my code. And the meaning of that is that, my identity is not my work. My identity is different from my work. And even if my work is terrible today, that doesn't make me a terrible person. And in reality, in the kingdom, my identity is in Christ, right? It's not how good of code I wrote or how good my accounting was today or, how good my driving skills were in my delivery truck or whatever it is that you do on a day-to-day basis. That's not your identity. Now, your quality of work is going to go up and down and up and down, and it's important to have a good quality of work, but that's not who you are. And so this is really in light of that, this is like really, really, really important from a kingdom leadership perspective, right? When we receive feedback about ourselves, this is not, and it's regardless of how the other person puts it, it's not about our identity. Our identity is secure in Christ. And so that's like number one thing that everybody's got to remember is your identity is secure in Christ, Christ in you. And no matter what somebody else says to you about how bad you are or how bad your work product is, that doesn't change. So my identity is not terrible software developer. And just like my identity in Christ is not irredeemable sinner, right? That's not how God views me. And I can go about making it better. And as I get better at things, my impact on the kingdom can be bigger, right? And so that's where we really want to go. So let's talk about where we want to start. And how, always and in everything, I feel like all the things that I've been talking about lately have been about humility. And this isn't a talk on humility, but everything seems to start there lately, and especially when it comes to feedback. I think for me to not make it a personal thing, I have to start from a standpoint of humility. And it's a little bit awkward to talk about for me too, because I'm sorry to say this and sorry to inform you. Please don't leave the webinar, but I am not the guy who's really good at humility. And you didn't get that guy today. You got the guy who is moderately aware enough of how bad he is that he can talk to other people about it. And that's about what you got. So I apologize, but here I am. And when we experience this identity crisis around feedback, really what's happening to us is we're letting our pride take control, right? And we're basically making it about us. And when we put ourselves on a pedestal like that, good or bad, that's pride. That's a really dangerous way of thinking. And we really need to change our approach to that. And humility is the way forward in that. And, this pride is going to kill us if we let it run our lives. And when it becomes about us, it's not as much about God or other people. And the impact that our work has had on other people, or in the impact that it's had on the kingdom, it's just about us. And I just have to say, we just have to make continual efforts to change that over time. I have had serious struggles with this in the past, and I've had minor struggles with it in the past, and I've had serious struggles today, and I'll have minor struggles today, and I'll have serious struggles in the future with it. I'm pretty sure. And I'm going to be reliant on somebody bringing me feedback about it, as I have in the past and as I will tomorrow, that pride can't run my life. So maybe a few keys, maybe a few points we can make about this. I think the first key is that communication is key. And when we're receiving feedback, this is so tough, so tough. A rhetorical question, anybody out there feel like they're just like the best communicator ever? They don't struggle with this pride thing. They're just really good at communication, right? I think I always have something to improve when it comes to communication. And I just have to remind myself when someone is bringing me feedback that maybe they might have some struggles with communication too, and that I shouldn't expect them to be communicating this feedback perfectly. And I'm going to need to have a lot of grace, because how that feedback gets communicated to me is important. This is one of those things I could probably spend a lot of time talking about, is like when you go to give feedback to someone, make sure you do it with grace and humility and all these things. Maybe that person who's bringing that feedback to you didn't really get that message. And maybe they're not that good at it. And really how good they are at communicating the feedback basically matters nothing. That's about how much it matters. What they're sharing with you is still important. And so I think it's always tempting to be like, oh, this person, they just didn't know what they were saying. And that doesn't matter. A lot of times too, like we have really high emotions. When someone's bringing us feedback, a lot of times, and especially for me, so this is something that I need a lot of feedback on, is my social awareness is pretty low. And it's something I always have to be aware of. And one of the things that I always have to do, especially when it comes to feedback about social awareness, is if someone who I know is a high social awareness person is bringing me feedback about social awareness, that is not feedback that I can ever reject, really. Like I have to accept that. And it's really important that I do that. But one of the things that happens to those of us who have like low social awareness is that we tend to hurt other people. with the things that we say. And so when someone's bringing me feedback, if they were the hurt person, there's going to be high emotions in that. And I need to have a lot of grace for those emotions, because how they feel is really true. It's not that I can be like, oh, you don't really feel that way. No, they really do feel that way. And those emotions tend to influence how we communicate things. And so when I'm sitting in like high emotions, my communication is just going to fall off a cliff, right? I'm not going to be able to say things the right way. None of my thoughts are going to be fully worked out. And then, you know, what happens is like, I am kind of resenting that person for their emotional response to what I did. And now I'm kind of like in my head, like, oh, you know, they're just overreacting, or they're making this a big deal or bigger deal than it should have been. Or, and then I'm just kind of like playing the blame game back and forth with them. And that's really not a good way to approach this. And if we start from the idea that people are just inherently not great at communicating their emotions, really, like, because what I would hope people could do better is like, I'm going to, you know, Bob is going to bring me how he felt about what I did, not like what I did. It's like, and that is going to give me an opportunity to be better about empathizing with Bob. And I'm going to hear him more in that case. And I'm going to be able to validate how he feels about it, instead of Bob coming to me and saying, hey, you said this the wrong way and you should have said it this way and you're terrible. So remember that that's like how they feel about it. We can just assume that that's how they should have brought it, and we can kind of interpolate ourselves when it comes to that. And so always, yeah, that's a big part of feedback is communication, just seeking to understand like where the person's coming from, not necessarily what it is they're saying in that moment or how they're saying it. The other thing about feedback that I think is really key is like this idea that you need to be proactive about it. You need to be seeking feedback. It's not just enough to like sit back, and me as a leader, especially, this is true. I can't just sit back as a leader in my office and just wait for people to come to me. I mean, it's especially true the higher you get in leadership and the more authority you have in an organization, the more you need to be seeking this out. And a quick like test of this, if everybody could just think for a minute, like, in the past year, have you received some really good critical feedback from your direct reports? And if the answer is no, that's not that you're a perfect leader, right? I think we all know that in our hearts, but I think we just kind of function as though that's the case. Like, see no evil, hear no evil. If I don't know about it, I don't need to know about it. But really, if you think about the statistics, they've done studies on this. You know, when people leave jobs, they're not really leaving jobs, they're leaving leaders. And so people leaving, that means they're leaving you, and they probably had something to say about you that might have helped you get better. But if you never actually asked them, you won't be getting better. Now, that means that you're going to have a lot of trust with people, right? And especially people you lead, because as a manager and as a leader, you always have the privilege of being right about everything. And you should try to not be right about everything, but you have that privilege, and you can do it if you want to. And I think most of the time, in my experience, people who use that are terrible leaders, and people who reserve that for only the most extreme cases are the best leaders. But it's still something you have, and you can just basically, if somebody brings something to you, you could override them on it. And that doesn't really build trust. So what I always tell people is make sure you go first, and in really probably what seems to be an overly dramatic way. This is true for feedback that you give to other people. Like, a lot of times we're just like, oh, they know what I think about their work. You know, I know that Paulette knows that I'm a fan of hers, but like, I need to actually tell her in big ways. And you know what's better than doing that is telling her that she's great in front of the whole team. That's going to really build her up. And the same thing is true about my faults. It's not enough for me to just acknowledge them in private. I need to make sure the team knows that I know that I have problems that I need to fix. And not only that, but that like, when I know about something that's wrong, I actually am the kind of person who acts on it. So that's really important. It's like speaking to a crowd without a microphone. I mean, you need to amplify some of this a little bit. Make sure people know who you are and that your identity is not caught up in your work product, and that you know that you make a lot of mistakes and that you're trying to get better. The more they know that, the more they're going to bring them to you. I think the next thing I want to talk about is that we should start with the assumption that they are correct. I think too often when it comes to feedback, the giver can barely get their thought out of their mouth before we're like, okay, I'm going to start tearing them down. And believe me, I'm an Enneagram 8. I love to get into an argument with people. Love to like shoot down every part of what they're saying. Feedback is not the time for that. If we're starting with humility, we should really start with the assumption that they're correct about whatever they're saying. And then we should work backwards from there. I'm not saying that everyone's always correct about the feedback they're giving you, but if we start from that assumption, we're less likely to end up at the point of denying everything they said. If we start from, okay, everything they said they're wrong, they're gonna have to prove to me that they're right, then I'm more likely to end up in a situation where everything they said is wrong. When actually, there's a lot of opportunities, even in a lot of wrong feedback. There's always, sometimes we say like it's a nugget of truth buried in there somewhere that we could take out and really use to get better. Even in a sea of like, no, we can't fix that, or no, we're not going to have Thursday is going to be free ice cream day around the office or something like that. So there's always going to be these problems with every feedback you receive, and that doesn't mean you can't get better, right? So there's always an excuse as to why this person isn't the right person to tell you that. Like for example, they're just too inexperienced. They don't understand what I do as well as I do because I have a lot more experience than they do. And if they had the experience, they'd agree with me. Or they don't have enough wisdom, or they're not mature enough, or they, one of the most dangerous ones, and it's the most prideful one that you get into, is, and I hear this a lot, shockingly, is the response is like, they do not appreciate all the things that I do for them. I'm just gonna let that sit for a second because it's so dangerous to say that to yourself when you're receiving feedback from someone. I mean, you're just basically shutting them down. You're basically saying, I don't even care if what they're saying is right, because what this is about is what I did for them. And that's just really bad. One of the stories I can think of from my past is like, Amanda mentioned I was involved in helping set up Elevate Building Supply. And one of the coolest things about doing that business and not having a single clue as to anything about, I mean, literally, I had no clue. People were having to show me like the smallest things, and it was a very humbling experience. But one of the days, I was really dead set on this idea that we should only send 2 trucks a week to certain regions, and that we're not going to like try to send trucks to another place because, efficiency is really important. And we got to make sure that truck only goes to that region on the day that it's supposed to go to that region. And I was really trying to minimize the number of truck routes. I was like, this is going to be better for the drivers because they're going to get back on time. They're not going to be late. And I know people are like screaming about, they want to get more stuff and whatever. It doesn't matter to me. But really, the guy that I was working with at the time, Sawyer Reynolds, he came to me and was like, man, I really get what you're saying about that. And I think you're wrong, first off. And I think that we could do this better. And I think there's a way to do this where we could solve all these problems. And I had been really shut off to that idea. And he came to me and he changed my mind about it. And if I had said to Sawyer, Sawyer, I've got 17 years of experience managing efficiency in construction. You just don't know what I know. That would have been bad. And you know what? The truth of the matter is he was right about that. And it did improve our relationships with the customers, and it didn't cause our efficiency to fall off at all. So yeah, I think it's just so important that we take this feedback and we don't try to like start with like, I know better than you. So the next thing that I hear a lot of leaders struggle with is when they hear feedback, they immediately go to questioning the motives of the person who's giving it. And this is, again, really dangerous. This is, again, like a prideful thing. And it's easy to think that someone's being cynical. And you know what? The fact is, they might be being cynical. I don't know. I don't know the specifics of whatever feedback situation you're in. But again, it doesn't really matter. If you have something to improve on, then you should own that. And, people always have motives in everything that they do. And sometimes it's going to be that person's for you as a person and they're trying to make you better. And sometimes it's not. And, the things you can only own the things that you're responsible for, which is yourself. And so I think you need to own that and accept the fact that you're a broken person who needs to get better. So dangerous to fall into that. Just saying, oh, they just really want this, or they, it scares me to even talk about it almost because it's so dangerous. So the next thing that I really am excited about talking about is if you want great feedback, you should do something with it. When you make a real change and you show the giver of the feedback that you're worth trusting to and being like vulnerable to, then they're going to see like, hey, last time I shared something with Brad, he decided to change the way he did something based on that feedback. And so what I see now is that Brad is a guy who cares about getting better. And Brad's a guy who acknowledges that he's not the best at everything. And so I feel more comfortable giving more feedback to him as a result of that. If you don't do stuff, because if you think about it, and this is especially true, again, with someone who you are leading directly, like their livelihood depends on you. You making good decisions every day. That's what their like, if you make bad decisions one day, they might have to go home and tell their family, like, I don't know what we're going to do about money. And that's just a cold, hard truth of it, right? And so, like, there's a risk every time somebody who reports to you comes to you with feedback like that. They're accepting a risk that they might walk home without a job that day. And so, when they bring something like that to you, you should feel extraordinarily honored that they took the risk and trusted you enough to give you that feedback. So when they do it, do something with it. That's a valuable thing that they just gave you. Even if it's wrong, take advantage of the trust that that's a terrible way to say it, but just do something with the trust. Thank them for it. It's just so important that we act on it. The more we act on it, the more they're going to provide feedback for us in the future. And that just means that we're going to get better and better and better as a result of it. I think a couple examples just are important about how we gather feedback here organizationally, because I think that's an important thing. Exit interviews. I want to talk about exit interviews. These are basically, man, the exit interviews are one of the best tools you can use to gather feedback about your own leadership if you do it right. And they're tough, right? They're really tough because you're only talking to people who have left. And if we remember the old adage from leadership, people don't leave jobs, they leave leaders. So really, if they left, they probably have something to say about you, good or bad. And I have found that to be true in every single exit interview scenario about me as a leader, is that someone has had something, they've had good things to say, and they've had things that are not so easy to hear, right? The funny thing is I really tried to look back on exit interviews for myself and think of like some examples of, hey, where did I go wrong here? Or where were they off about the feedback that they gave me, and where I was really right, actually. And I honestly just could not find anything. Every time someone has given me feedback in an exit interview, it's been really helpful for me. And it's so hard because it's a lot of times people don't leave under the best circumstances, and you're like, oh, I know why that person left. I don't need to do an exit interview with them. But really, could you learn something? Is it a possibility to learn something from that person about your own leadership? And I think when we have that mindset, it's a powerful thing. We can make a lot of improvements, change for the better, right? And one of the things too is, like, we talked a little bit about how people are reluctant to give you feedback because you're their livelihood. After you've fired them or after they're gone, you're no longer their livelihood, so they're free to say whatever they want to about you, right? You're going to get the best unfiltered feedback that way, and that can be really valuable. The other thing we do is employee surveys. We do about every quarter, we send out an all-company employee survey, which is really cool. Now, these are interesting because people, what they would say as feedback to their own leader isn't necessarily what they would say as feedback to the CEO, right? And as a all-company employee survey, really what they're saying on that survey is being read by the CEO. and other senior leaders in the organization. And so they're not going to feel as comfortable without it being anonymous. And so these generally have to be anonymous to get good feedback. And one of the problems with anonymous surveys is like you tend to get really unclear feedback. And that's a real challenge with anonymous surveys. I still think you get good feedback. You just have to keep it in the right context. It's not about like the specific story of what they were talking about. It becomes more of like, well, just one example of this was we do a company rally, and we got some feedback about the company rally. And one of the feedback points was like, said something about one of the speakers being kind of down on the event. And I was like, this doesn't even really make a lot of sense. I can't make sense of what they're saying. And so I really wish I could talk to that person about, what they were thinking about that. And a lot of times when you have a survey like this, you don't really know. You don't really know exactly what they said. We spent actually just this morning, the whole morning, talking about 2 points of feedback, literally probably 3 hours. And I bet they're still in there talking about it, actually, after I left to come do this, about a couple points of feedback from the company survey. And I really wish that I could just go find that person and be like, I want to just grab coffee. I want you to explain everything that you said. I'd love to get more context. I'd love to know who you are, what the situation was. But I can't, because it's anonymous, and we value the anonymity more than we value the ability to go do that, because I think we would never have gotten that feedback in the first place. And the truth is, we have enough to go on. Like, we know where we need to go next as a result of that feedback. So, I'll go ahead and close out before we hit the Q&A. But I was kind of reflecting with the Lord on this, and one of the funniest things he kind of showed me a while back was I've always had this kind of like idea that I would retire early, right? Not necessarily like I'm not going to work anymore, but just like, money isn't going to be the thing that drives me anymore. Not that it is today, but like it's not going to be something that I have to be concerned about. And I always thought that would be really cool. If I didn't have to work, then I wouldn't have a job, and maybe I'd go do volunteer work or something like that. But it wouldn't necessarily be for money, and I could do it for the highest purpose I could possibly find. But I like, it's kind of, I've cringed at that in recent years. I've gotten to this point now where I'm embracing the feedback so much that I actually like it. The idea of leaving a company where you have this high feedback culture actually scares me. The idea that I would go and leave it and then not have people helping make me better is really scary. I would worry about losing my identity, actually. And this is not feedback that I ever got from a church. It's feedback that I get from a company. And it's not feedback about like, hey, you didn't do your form right. It's feedback about, hey, man, you were really prideful in that moment. And those types of things. Or you hurt that person in this moment. And where would I be in life if I didn't have people telling me that? Like, I would be kind of not a great person to be around. I would be leaning into my identity as a sinner, not my identity in Christ. And so I really love that that is something that a company can help with. I love that that's a way that God's kingdom and his authority can be expressed through business, is through healing me personally by giving me feedback. So with that said, I guess we'll just open it up to Q&A. Amanda, do you have anything for us?
Thanks, Brad. That was so good. I appreciate that. Hey guys, we are on our live Q&A time. If you have questions down at the bottom, you can use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we're going to do live questions with Brad. Brad, as you were talking, I pulled up Proverbs 15. I don't know if you know this, but in the Passion Translation, Proverbs 15, verse 31 and 32 says, it says constructive criticism, which is feedback, opened your heart to the path of life, making you right at home among the wise. Refusing constructive criticism shows you have no interest in improving your life. For revelation insight only comes as you accept correction and wisdom that it brings. You just talked to us about that, and I appreciate that. I'm sure a lot of people learned that feedback really is the breakfast of champions, right?
Absolutely.
All right.
I know where I'd be without it. I'd be probably dead in a ditch somewhere.
Right. Yeah. So, question one, really funny. What is a floppy disk?
Floppy disk, yeah. So, yeah, it's something we used to use for backups. If you were born before, 1990, you probably don't know what one is, but it's a little square, and it's actually not floppy. It's hard. They call it floppy because the thing inside is kind of floppy. But yeah, you used to store stuff on it. You wouldn't even use storage mediums anymore. I don't even know what to even liken that to. If you remember USB drives, it was like the USB drive of the 90s. So
That was great. All right. Question one. We won't count the floppy disk question there.
yeah, yeah.
What are some practical ways that you've grown in when you receive feedback, not letting it like affect your identity? Like, what are some of those practical ways that you've done this over the years?
One of the things that I've had to do over the years is I have to commit myself and remind myself always to not react in the moment. Like whenever someone's sitting me down to give me feedback, because you can always tell, right? You always know like this person is about to dump something on me, and it's going to be painful, and I'm going to experience some emotions from this, and despite the fact that I am a kind of a high C personality, high detail, high task orientation, I'm still an emotional person. And it's still like, it cuts at the portion of me that's like my identity, really. And so I always have to tell myself, just thank them and then walk away and like follow up with them later. Take some time so that you can actually pray about it. Because that's one thing. I mean, absolutely, you should be praying about feedback that people give you, and ask the Lord, like, what do I do with this? Because he's going to tell you, and it's really important to not have a bad reaction in the moment, which I was really prone to doing. Even like probably 5 or 6 years ago, I was really not very good at that, and I just had to. And now I think I think the last like really big impactful piece of feedback I got, it was just like, okay, I hear what you're saying. I need to go think about this. And I'm not saying I disagree or agree with you. I'm just saying this is just who I am. I'm a processor, not a react in the moment kind of guy. And so I'm just going to go think about it. I think committing yourself to not having an emotional or knee-jerk reaction is a really practical thing you can do. And then I do think praying about it, I mean, that's an absolute, you should totally do that. There's been a lot of times where my knee-jerk reaction was, man, this person's wrong, and then I pray about it, and I'm like, and the Lord convinces me. He's like, man, yeah, that's a problem, and then I'm like, okay, well, I got confirmation of that from the Lord, and now I can definitely say that it's a problem, and then I can fix it.
Really, really practical. Thanks, Brad. So the next question, right off of where you left off, can you give us an example of some of the hardest yet best feedback you've received and who gave that to you?
Oh man, okay, story time. Okay, so probably like 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, probably. I was definitely in some struggling moments. I was probably, if I had to say, I was probably drowning in my own pride. Not doing well with work, not doing really well with anything in life, to be honest with you. And I was just kind of like mad at the world. And Cal Zint actually came to me and he was like, hey, I think you need a fresh start. And he was like, I think the Lord told me you're supposed to help start Elevate Building Supply. And that was kind of the moment that really caused that. But in the moment, he gave me some really important feedback. And it's feedback that I rejected actually in the moment. And he said to me like, hey man, like, and he saw me struggling with the pride portion. He was trying to like gently tell me, and he was telling me that, hey, you're just kind of like making this all about you. All these problems that you have. And he's like, it has nothing to do with the fact that they're real problems or not. It's just, you're making it all about you. And that comes out in your work too. And you see it, and you're like, when you build a spread, and it's not just in like failures, it's in successes too. And that's really where it becomes really dangerous, this pride thing. And he said this to me, and I was like, no. And I think my initial reaction was just like, no, you don't understand what I'm facing or the things I'm going through, and you just don't understand at all. And I think that was like the Lord came down on me pretty hard after that for like the next year, probably. Like finding an alternate way to teach me that lesson, which was a lot. I wish I had just listened to Cal at the time and said, yeah, you know what, you're right about that. I do a really terrible job at that. And I could say like I got better at it over the course of the year, and I've got tons of stories of how that happened. And it was mostly through the Lord putting me in a business where I have no idea what's going on. And there was literally nothing I could celebrate in my own success in it because I couldn't do any of it. There was a moment where I was trying to figure out how to drive a forklift into a truck, and I literally could not do it right. And I remember just like yelling out at the Lord, like, what have you done to me here? And then like within a couple months after that, like I was basically by myself for that first 6 months of doing it. And within a couple months, he started to send people who really knew what they were doing. And it was an opportunity for me to celebrate their success in it. And it kind of broke me in a lot of ways of my celebrating my own success in it. And it really gave me this opportunity to celebrate other people's success, but I never really understood it until way later. And so that's not an example of me doing it well. And to be honest with you, I'll probably come see me in 5 years. I'll be telling another story about how 2 years ago I was struggling with pride again, and somebody had to tell me about it. But that's just one example I can think of that's kind of recent and probably the most profound that I've experienced. And I'm so thankful that he had the obedience and to the Lord to tell me that too. I think it was really important, even though I didn't listen. It was still really important. So
Thanks for that example. That was really good. As a leader, how do you word questions to get feedback from your team?
That's a great question. I think a lot of times as leaders, we have ways that we've figured out to ask questions with an intended answer, right? I think, I catch myself doing this all the time where I'm like, I think I know the answer, and I'm going to ask him in a way that makes it seem like he's really giving me the right answer, but really I knew what the right answer was all along. You can't do that when it comes to feedback. How you ask is really important. Making sure you don't use any judgmental language in the asking, like you're just kind of don't prime the pump, maybe I should say. So don't say like, hey, I'm, just thinking about my own performance, and I know we have a great relationship, and I know you think I do a good job, but do you have any feedback for me? Like that's a terrible way to do that. Probably the best way would be start with something that you've done wrong and you're not good at, and say, hey, I know that I'm not really that good at picking up on people's emotions. And have you seen any ways that I've done that recently in our interactions? Because what you do then is you're starting by acknowledging that you have something to improve on, and you're framing the discussion in a way where it's not like what you tell me I'm going to reject, because I'm already saying that I agree with you about what you're going to tell me. And as time goes on and you build up more trust with people doing that, you're going to get more of the unprompted stuff. But if you're just looking for a way to kickstart it and you haven't really gotten any feedback from that person, that might be one way to do it. So
Awesome. Okay, we have 2 more questions. Next question is, I, like you, Brad, did not receive feedback well. I've gone many years of being prideful. Hearing your story, I really relate to it. How do I pivot and change? Do I just apologize? What ways would you say I start doing this better?
Man, there's a good friend of mine gave me a book. He was one of the guys that called me out on pride. He gave me a really good book on humility. And I read that, and it was a profound thing for me. And I would recommend that book. And I wish I could tell you the name of it off the top of my head. But I'll find it and I'll get it to Amanda. Maybe she can email it out to everybody after. But that was a really profound thing for me. It kind of changed how I thought about myself and my identity and the people around me. And I think I had to somehow I had to get to the conclusion. And I think it's funny because if somebody had come along and had this conversation with me, I would not have even understood. It would have been like they were speaking Greek to me, because I don't think the Lord had really like exerted the change on me that had to happen. It was kind of like a violent thing that had to be just ripped out of me, in a lot of ways. And I don't think that change had happened back then. So until all these things came along, I wish that there was something that I could just say that's like, hey, these are the things that you do differently. But it didn't really work like that for me. I don't know. A book would be a good place to start, though. That's kind of where it started for me, along with a lot of other things that were happening in my life.
Yeah. A violent way for something to be ripped out of you. I think that's one of the
Yeah.
best illustrations of pride, like with
Because I was holding on to it so tight. I was holding on to my own pride so tightly that the Lord had to rip it out. And yeah.
yeah. We will get the name of that book to you guys, and we'll include it as we email the recording out. So promise y'all we'll get you that. Okay, Brad, last question we have. It's a good one. They want to know, what are the questions that you ask in an exit interview?
Oh man, that is a good one. So sometimes when it comes to feedback, I get really negative, because it's like, that's the stuff that I can use to improve the most. Don't tell me I'm doing a good job. That's all stuff, I'm not going to change. If I'm doing a good job, I'm not going to change anything. So I don't need to hear about that. And I'm only going to focus on the bad things. Don't necessarily do that. Make sure you ask questions that like give them an opportunity to share a good experience with you, because I think that's really important for you to hear, as well as the things that you need to do better. So some of the times I like to ask, I think we have a standard form as a company, but it includes questions like, how was your training? That's something that we don't spend enough time as leaders thinking about, is how we train and onboard people. And so like, how is that for you? And how was your interview process? And in what ways did your leader give you coaching in your day-to-day job? One question I would want to know is, were they doing one-on-ones with you consistently? Do you feel like that you trusted them? What are some ways that you felt like they could have improved their leadership? Or did you ever have a conflict with your leader? Could you tell a story about that, where you had conflict and maybe it wasn't resolved, or maybe it was resolved?
Awesome. That's great. Well, we had
Shame.
another question come in, and so
Cool.
we're going to do one more because we have time. So why
Yes,
not?
I love questions.
The question says, I like to give feedback to others and really want to receive feedback for what I do, but sometimes it comes from a place of insufficiency. Is that a problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I mean, I think we all know that like the Lord's grace is enough for us, right? And it's not about me. This is not about me getting better enough to be saved, or justify myself in any way, right? That's not what it's about. And so like, I have to start from a position of like, I am a child of God. I am his son, and he loves me. And the things that I'm going to do with my feedback are not going to change that at all. There's no feedback somebody can give me that will change that, either make me a son of God or make me not a son of God. That is my identity, and that can't be changed. But I definitely feel you, and there have been a lot of times over the years where I've been like, man, that one cut deep. And I don't know if I can do this. And like, I don't know if like, maybe God really doesn't want me. Man, I've been there. I know the feeling. I hope you find somebody who can go grab coffee with you or something and tell you otherwise. Cause I think sometimes I've needed that over the years too, is like somebody to just remind me of that. Like I'm not this terrible person that I've made myself out to be. And that I'm called to something different, and that the things that I'm doing are enough um, for God, even though he wants more. So
Yeah, that was a great answer for that. Well, we appreciate Brad taking time to be with us today. We thank each one of you. Just a reminder, we will send out the recording of this webinar later on this afternoon or this evening, or maybe in the middle of the night, depending on where you are watching this from. I want to tell you about two things we have coming up at Kingdom at Work. Our next Kingdom at Work leadership workshop is October 1st through the 2nd. Actually through the 3rd. It is in Lubbock, Texas, and there is a QR code on your screen if you would like to get more information on that. This is a workshop for business owners and CEOs. We would love to have you and your executive team come and join us. We have more information on our website on this challenging yet transformation event that we get to put on. Last thing I want to tell you about is next month, we will have, for the first time ever, a panel of live Q&A. We will have different business leaders from different organizations, and the next webinar will be October 9th. You can register for that webinar with that QR code, and you can either email us in questions, or you can text it in with that phone number right there, 806-302-0559. We are taking questions from our conference, from our workshop, from those of you that are out there. Anything you can ask, business related, kingdom related. We want to help equip you and be a great resource. We don't have all the answers, but we serve a God who does. And so if we don't have the answer, we will circle back with you. Thank you again for joining us. We pray that you have a blessed day. Bye-bye.